My name is Isabella, and I am 22 years old. I grew up in a small, quiet town where traditions ran deep, a place where family honor mattered more than personal desires. And love, at least the kind I read about in books, wasn't something you chose, it was decided for you. From a young age, I was taught what was expected of me: be obedient, respect my elders, and one day marry the man my parents chose. That was the way it had always been, and no one questioned it. But in secret, I did. I had a different world, hidden between the pages of my books. While other girls learned to cook and sew, I spent my time devouring romance novels, dreaming of a love that made hearts race and souls connect. I imagined a man who would look at me like I was his entire world. Someone who would hold my hand just because he wanted to. Someone who would whisper secrets under the moonlight, and who would choose me not because of duty, but because he couldn't imagine a life without me. I spent hours by my window, staring at the sky, lost in daydreams of grand love stories. In my mind, I was always the heroine, and somewhere out there, my hero was waiting. But reality had other plans. At 21, my parents told me I was engaged. The decision had been made long before I even knew. My husband-to-be was a man I had never met, Dante. He was 6 years older than me, living in a world far from mine. A businessman in a modern city, a place where buildings touched the sky and people moved too fast. A place where love was not something whispered under the stars, but a quiet understanding between two people who simply played their roles. I wanted to protest, I wanted to say, but what about love? What about choosing? But the words never left my lips. My father's voice was final, and my mother's eyes told me this was how it had to be. So I smiled, nodded, and accepted my fate. A few months later, I left behind the only home I had ever known. The town that shaped me, the dreams I held on to, and the part of me that believed love could be like the stories in my books. I stepped into the modern world with my new husband, a man I barely knew, and told myself that maybe, just maybe, love would find me there. The day my parents told me I was getting married, I remember feeling like my life had been decided for me. Without me. I was barely 20 when they sat me down in our small living room, my mother's hands clasped tightly in her lap, my father's expression unreadable. There was no warm conversation, no gentle build-up, just a statement. Isabella, you will marry Dante. I felt my chest tighten. I had always known this day would come. In our family, in our tradition, love was not something you found, it was something that was chosen for you, and my choice had been made. Dante came from a well-respected family. He was successful, responsible, and older, 6 years older. He had a quiet confidence that my parents admired, and they assured me he would take good care of me. He is a good man, Isabella, my mother had said, as if that alone would make me love him. I nodded because what else could I do? Saying no had never been an option. I grew up reading romance novels, imagining grand love stories, where two people met in the most unexpected ways, where stolen glances turned into whispered confessions, where love was a slow, burning fire that could not be ignored. But love, as I had dreamed it, was not part of my reality. Instead, I packed my bags and left my small town, leaving behind the familiar streets where I had spent my childhood. I traded them for the towering skyscrapers of New York, for a life with a man I barely knew. Dante was kind but reserved. He provided everything I needed: a beautiful apartment, security, stability. But he was always busy, always working. Our conversations were polite, practical. There were no deep talks, no moments where he really saw me. And so my life became quiet. I spent my days wandering through the city, watching couples laugh over coffee, watching strangers hold hands in the park. I read my romance novels more than ever, escaping into worlds where love was thrilling and undeniable. It was a quiet Saturday morning, the kind of morning that made me want to curl up in bed with a warm drink and a good book. But instead, I found myself dragging my tired body out of bed, feeling sluggish and drained. I wasn't feeling my best. My body ached and a dull headache pressed behind my eyes. It was that time of the month, and all I wanted was a little extra care, maybe a warm hug, or just someone to notice that I wasn't okay. Dante was home, but as always he was busy. He sat at his desk, his laptop open, his fingers typing away as his phone buzzed every few minutes. He barely looked up when I walked past him. I stood in the doorway for a moment, watching him, waiting, hoping he would glance at me and just see me. But he didn't. I sighed softly and stepped closer. "Do you need anything?" I asked, my voice quieter than usual. Dante finally looked up, offering a small, distracted smile. "No, I'm fine. Thanks, Kara." That was it. No, "How are you?" No, "You look tired," just a polite response before he turned back to his work. I wanted to tell him I wasn't fine. I wanted to say I felt exhausted, that my body was aching, that I wished he would just sit with me for a while, but I didn't. I had learned not to expect much. Later that afternoon, I stepped outside to get some fresh air. The apartment felt suffocating, and I just needed a break from the walls that held too much silence. That's when I ran into Liam. He was heading out, dressed casually in jeans and a dark sweater. The moment he saw me, he paused, his expression shifting. "Hey, you okay?" I blinked at him. "Yeah, why?" Liam tilted his head slightly, studying me. "You just look a little off." For a second I hesitated. Was it that obvious? "It's nothing serious," I finally said with a small sigh. "Just one of those days." "Ah," he nodded knowingly. "One of those days?" I gave a weak smile. "Yeah." Liam's gaze softened. "Say no more, you need to pick me up." He pointed toward the cafe across the street. "Best hot chocolate in the city, trust me." I almost said no. I almost told him I should probably go back inside, back to my husband, who barely noticed me. But something about Liam's easygoing nature made it hard to refuse. This would be the first time we had a real conversation, as we had only exchanged greetings in the past. 15 minutes later, we were sitting by the window of the small cafe, the scent of cocoa and cinnamon filling the air. The warm mug between my hands felt comforting, the heat slowly easing the tension in my body. Liam was tall, with a lean but athletic build. His dark brown hair was always slightly tousled, giving him an effortlessly charming look. His deep-set green eyes held a quiet warmth, and there was a certain ease in his smile that made him approachable. A light stubble framed his strong jawline, adding to his rugged yet refined appearance. We talked, not about anything serious but about little things. Books, the quirks of the city, zodiac signs. And for the first time in a long time, I felt seen. By the time I returned home, the apartment was just as I had left it. Dante was still in his study, his world consumed by work. I lingered by the door, watching him, waiting for him to notice me. Finally I spoke. "Hey." Dante looked up briefly, smiling. "Hey, did you go out?" "Yeah, just for a bit." "That's nice," he said, and just like that his attention was back on his screen. I wasn't upset, I wasn't angry, I was just tired. Dante loved me in his own way. I knew that, but sometimes I wondered, was love supposed to feel this quiet? Weeks went by, and I ran into Liam a few times, on my way back from the park or after a quick grocery run where he'd offer to carry my bags. Other times, it was after a pedicure and manicure appointment where he never failed to notice the change in my nail polish and compliment it. Each encounter was effortless, natural. We talked about different things every time we met, sometimes about books, other times about the little things in life that often go unnoticed. And each time I walked away smiling, feeling seen, heard, and for the first time in a long while, truly understood. On this special day, I woke up to the soft glow of morning light filtering through the curtains, casting long, golden streaks across the ceiling. A quiet excitement fluttered in my chest. My birthday. For a moment, I just lay there, staring at the ceiling, allowing myself to imagine how the day might unfold. Maybe Dante had planned something, a surprise, a dinner reservation, even just a simple happy birthday whispered against my temple as he pulled me into a sleepy embrace. I turned to his side of the bed. It was empty. I sat up, rubbing the sleep from my eyes. The faint aroma of coffee drifted from the kitchen, mingling with the distant sound of typing. I padded barefoot across the floor, heart drumming lightly with hope. Maybe he had left a note. Maybe he was waiting for me with a small breakfast, a candle flickering in the morning light. But as I stepped into the living room, reality sank in. Dante sat at the dining table, his laptop open, fingers flying across the keyboard. The usual half-empty coffee cup sat beside him, steam curling lazily toward the ceiling. The only sound in the apartment was the rhythmic tapping of his keys. There were no flowers, no card, no acknowledgement of the day at all. I swallowed the lump forming in my throat. Maybe he was pretending to forget. Maybe he had something planned for later. I forced a smile and spoke. "Good morning." He barely looked up. "Morning, Kara." That was it. No warmth, no hesitation, just 2 words before he went right back to his work. I stood there for a moment, waiting for him to remember, to glance up at me with realization, to say something, anything. But he didn't. I turned away, my stomach twisting, and went about my morning. The hours passed. Dante left for work without another word, his lips brushing my cheek absent-mindedly as he muttered something about a meeting. I checked my phone, texts from my parents, from Chiara, from a few old friends, but nothing from my husband. By evening, I was restless. I told myself not to care, not to let it get to me, but disappointment hung over me like a storm cloud. Then, as I stepped into the building's lobby, a familiar voice called my name. "Isabella." I turned. Liam stood near the reception desk, dressed casually in a navy blue shirt, his arms crossed, but as soon as his eyes met mine, his expression softened. He smiled, a real genuine smile. "Happy birthday." I froze. "You remembered?" He pushed off the desk and walked toward me. "Of course. You told me about it a while back. You think I'd forget something that important?" My chest ached at his words. Before I could respond, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, neatly wrapped package. "It's nothing big, but I thought you'd like it." I took it hesitantly, my fingers brushing against the crisp wrapping paper. Carefully, I peeled it open. A book. My book. The one I had spent hours talking about weeks ago. The one that shaped my love for literature as a teenager. The one that, just in passing, I had mentioned I wished I could reread. I stared at it, my throat tightening. "Liam," my voice was barely a whisper. "This is perfect." His lips quirked into a small smile. Then he said, "I'm glad. You deserve to be celebrated." Something in my chest broke at that moment. Not because Liam had done anything grand, but because he had noticed. He had remembered, and Dante hadn't. By the time I got home, the weight of the day pressed down on me like an unbearable burden. I stepped into the apartment. Dante was still at his desk, his tie loosened, his fingers flying over his keyboard. I hesitated, then took a slow breath. One last chance. "Dante, do you know what today is?" I said. He frowned, pausing mid-typing. His eyes flicked to the corner of his screen where the date was displayed. "Shit." Running a hand through his hair, he stood up and walked toward me. "Isabella, I'm so sorry, it completely slipped my mind," he said to me. My throat tightened. All day I had made excuses for him, convinced myself that there was a surprise waiting, that he was playing some elaborate game of pretending to forget. But he had genuinely forgotten. He reached for my hands, squeezing them. "Happy birthday, Kara. I swear I'll make it up to you." I forced a smile. "It's okay." It wasn't. The next day, he came home with a beautifully wrapped gift in hand. "Here," he said, smiling as he placed the package in my hands. "I wanted to get you something special." I unwrapped it slowly, my heart already sinking. A bottle of perfume. "Floral scents," he said, grinning. "I remember you like them." I stared at the bottle. Floral scents. He didn't remember. I was allergic to floral perfumes. The realization hit me like a wave, washing away every last piece of hope I had clung to. Dante had forgotten my birthday. Then, in an effort to fix it, he had bought something he thought I would like, but hadn't actually paid attention to who I was. I set the bottle down carefully on the dresser. Beside it lay Liam's book. 2 gifts. 2 people. One remembered the smallest details about me. The other didn't remember at all. I turned to Dante, my lips curving into a forced smile. "Thank you." But deep inside, something had shifted. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep. The room was dark, except for the dim glow of the city lights filtering through the curtains. Dante was asleep beside me, his breath steady and unbothered. I turned to look at him. His face, so familiar, so constant in my life, should have brought me comfort. But instead it brought me an ache I couldn't name. My eyes drifted to the dresser where Dante's gift sat, a bottle of perfume I couldn't wear. And next to it, Liam's book, a reminder that someone else had been paying attention. A sharp wave of guilt washed over me. What was I doing? I turned away, pressing my fingers against my temples. The weight of it all felt suffocating, and I knew I couldn't keep it in any longer. I reached for my phone and walked into the sitting room to call the one person who had always been my anchor, Chiara. She picked up after the second ring. Isabella, it's late, are you okay? I swallowed, my throat tight. I don't know. Her voice softened. What's wrong? She asked. I hesitated, my heart pounding, before finally whispering, I think I'm in love with someone else. There was silence on both ends, a long, heavy silence. Then a sharp exhale. Isabella, what are you saying? I squeezed my eyes shut, my fingers gripping the sheets. I don't know, Chiara, I feel something for him, and it scares me. Who? She asked. I hesitated, but there was no point in hiding it. My neighbor, Liam. She didn't respond right away, and when she did, her voice was low. Isabella, this is serious, you're married. I let out a bitter laugh. I know. But, she hesitated, are you sure it's love, or is it just attention? I flinched at the question, because the truth was, I wasn't sure. Liam made me feel seen, heard. He remembered the small things. He noticed me in a way Dante hadn't since we got married. But was that love? Or was it just the intoxicating relief of being noticed after feeling forgotten for so long? I don't know, I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. But when I'm around him, I feel like I matter. You matter, Isabella, she said softly. With or without him, I blinked back tears. I know, I replied. Chiara's voice was quiet but firm. Isabella, love isn't just about how someone makes you feel in the moment. It's about commitment, sacrifice. You stood in front of God and your family and promised to love Dante. That has to mean something. I bit my lip, her words cutting deep. I don't know what to do, I whispered. I don't want to betray my marriage. I don't want to be that woman, I said to her. Then don't be, she said simply. Tears pricked my eyes. It's not that easy, Chiara. I know, she admitted. But I also know you, and I know that deep down you don't want to hurt anyone. You just want to be loved the way you deserve. And you deserve that, Isabella. But not like this. Her words hung between us, heavy and raw. I curled into myself, silent tears slipping down my cheeks. Chiara, I whispered, if you were me, what would you do? Would you follow your heart or your duty? She sighed. The real question is, which one do you think will still hold you together when this is all over? I didn't have an answer, but I knew I needed to find one. The days that followed were a blur of confusion, guilt, and an ache that refused to leave my chest. I tried to go about my daily routine as if nothing had changed, as if I hadn't spilled my heart out to Chiara in the dead of night. As if I wasn't struggling with the weight of emotions I wasn't supposed to have. But I felt it in every moment. I felt it when Dante kissed my forehead absent-mindedly before leaving for work, barely looking at me. I felt it when I passed Liam in the building's lobby, and his gaze lingered just a second too long, filled with something unspoken. And worst of all, I felt it when I was alone, when I couldn't escape my own thoughts. I wanted an answer, a sign, something to tell me what to do. And then it came. Dante had to leave for a work trip. It wasn't the first time. He traveled often for business. But this time, as I watched him pack his suitcase, an unsettling feeling coiled in my stomach. How long will you be gone? I asked, leaning against the doorframe. Just a few days, he said, fastening the zipper on his bag. I'll be back before you even miss me. He finally looked up, studying me for a moment before stepping closer and pressing a kiss to my forehead. I love you, Cara. I wanted to believe that those words meant the same thing they once did. But something had changed. And as I stood by the window later that evening, watching his car disappear down the street, I realized this was the first time that I didn't feel sad to see him go. I should have felt ashamed of that. Maybe I did. But what scared me more was the quiet relief I felt deep inside. and I hated myself for it. Liam had become a safe place, a quiet presence in a life that felt increasingly lonely. I found myself seeking his company more than I should. It was never intentional. A shared glance in the hallway, a casual chat in the cafe. The way he always noticed when something was off with me, when I needed a moment to breathe. That evening, as I stood by my apartment window, watching the city lights flicker in the distance, my phone buzzed. A message from Liam. It read, "Can't shake the feeling that something's on your mind. Wanna talk?" I hesitated, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. I shouldn't. I should go to Dante, try to talk to him instead. But Dante was out of town. So I replied, "Meet me at the cafe?" When I arrived, he was already there, waiting with 2 cups of hot chocolate. The sight of it made me smile in spite of myself. "You really do have an obsession with this place," I said, sitting across from him. He shrugged. "Guilty, but I think you secretly love it too." I wrapped my hands around the warm mug, letting the silence settle between us. Then softly I admitted, "This needs to stop, Liam." His expression darkened slightly, but he didn't speak right away. When he did, his voice was quiet but firm. "You deserve to be seen, Isabella." The words sent a shiver down my spine. I looked away, staring at the steam rising from my drink. "But I'm married, Liam." A muscle in his jaw tensed, but he nodded. "I know." We sat there, neither of us knowing what to say. The weight of the unspoken hung between us, thick and undeniable. Finally, Liam leaned forward, his voice gentle. "I don't want to be the reason you regret anything. But if you ever need someone to talk to, I'll be here." I nodded, but the truth was, I didn't trust myself anymore. Because every time I was with Liam, I felt more alive. And I didn't know how to stop. I had thought about my conversation with Chiara, my vows, and my commitment. I had always been a person of integrity, and I wasn't about to let myself down now. I stood up and left Liam, not turning back on my decision. The next morning, Dante was back from his trip. Later that evening, I sat across from Dante at the dinner table, my fingers lightly tracing the rim of my glass. The air between us felt heavy, filled with all the things I hadn't said. His phone buzzed beside his plate, his eyes flitting to the screen every few minutes. I knew I couldn't let this continue, not anymore. "Dante, we need to talk," I said to him. He didn't even look up. I swallowed, feeling frustration coil in my chest. Dante put the phone down. His head snapped up then, brows pulling together. He hesitated before finally setting the phone aside. "What's wrong?" I let out a slow breath. "That's the problem, Dante, you don't even know." He frowned, confused. "What do you mean?" I hesitated, choosing my words carefully. "I don't feel seen, Dante, I don't feel known, and I don't feel loved." His expression darkened. "That's not true." I let out a humorless chuckle. "Is it? Because tell me, Dante, when was the last time you asked me how I was doing? Really doing? When was the last time you noticed when I was hurting?" He opened his mouth, but no words came out. "We got married so quickly," I continued, my voice softer now. "We didn't really court each other. Didn't take time to know who we were outside of the excitement of getting married. And now, we live together, but it feels like we're strangers." Dante leaned back in his chair, rubbing a hand over his face. "We love each other, Isabella. Isn't that enough?" "No," I said firmly. "Love isn't just a feeling, Dante. It's a choice, a daily one, and I feel like you stopped choosing me a long time ago." His jaw tensed, his hands balling into fists on the table. "I work hard for us, I provide, That's not what I need." My voice cracked slightly. "I don't need just a provider, I need a partner." A thick silence stretched between us. I pressed my fingers against my temple. "You forgot my birthday." His face tightened with guilt. "I told you I was sorry." "It's not about the birthday, Dante, it's about what it meant." I shook my head. "Do you know who remembered?" He raised a brow, waiting. I swallowed. "Liam," I said. Dante's entire body stiffened. "Liam?" I nodded. "Yes." He let out a short laugh, but there was no humor in it. "Why does our neighbor know your birthday?" I hesitated. "Because he listens, because he asks." Dante's jaw clenched. "And I don't?" I exhaled. "Dante, I shouldn't have to go outside my marriage to feel heard, to feel like I matter." His hands trembled slightly. "So what, Isabella? You think he knows you better than I do?" No, I said, my voice thick with emotion, but he notices things about me that you don't, and that hurts. Dante looked away, his chest rising and falling rapidly. After a long pause, his voice came out hoarse. I never meant to make you feel this way. I know, I whispered. And that's the hardest part, because love isn't just about meaning well, it's about showing up, about making the other person feel like they matter. His fingers raked through his hair. I don't want to lose you. Tears burned my eyes. Then we have to fix this. We have to really know each other. We didn't do that before we got married, but it's not too late now. His eyes met mine, desperation flickering in them. So what do we do? I took a shaky breath. We start over. We stop assuming that love is enough. We take time to actually learn about each other. To ask the right questions, to be present. We stop being strangers in the same house. Dante reached for my hand hesitantly. I don't want to lose you, Isabella. Tell me how to make this right. I looked at our intertwined fingers, a tear slipping down my cheek. Show me that I matter. Be here, fully. Let's not just stay married, Dante. Let's build something real. A long silence stretched between us before he gave a slow nod. I'll do better, he said. And for the first time in a long time, I believed him. That night, we didn't sleep on opposite sides of the bed. We lay facing each other, hands intertwined, just talking about random stuff. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't fixed overnight, but it was a start. Marriage is about choosing each other every day. When love feels distant, it's not always because it's gone, but because it needs to be nurtured. True love isn't just about feeling, it's about effort, understanding, and showing up. I hope you all enjoyed this story. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Take care, and see you in the next story.